Scream, the novelization by Landon Turner. Based on the screenplay by Kevin Williamson and the 1996 film by Wes Craven. Chapter 1. The Game Begins. It happened in California, a small town on the West Coast, the town of Woodsboro, a quiet community set apart from the larger, more bustling cities like LA and San Francisco. Senators for years during the 20th century lambasted California for being a liberal cesspool, neglecting the beliefs and values of entire swaths of smaller towns like Bakersfield and towns like Woodsboro. It was something right out of a horror movie, and it had gone off like a powder keg. It had started with one tiny spark, a phone call. What was once a revolutionary invention in long-range communication became a weapon and an instrument of terror for a group of innocent adolescents. It began on a cold November school night for a young 17-year-old girl in 1996. It was the start of a series of crimes that served as some of the most brutal series of murders in the annals of American history. Think Bundy, Dahmer, and their ilk. Bodies were found mutilated and posed purely for shock value. It was a total bloodbath. It sparked one of the greatest American debates during the oncoming of the 21st century, the effects of horror movies and violent media on real-life violence. The powder keg had been simmering, bubbling to the surface of the quasi-peaceful, humdrum everyday life of the average American. At least, life was that way for most of them. If you looked past the MTV awards, the glitzy celebrities, the art, the elites, and the ever-threatening milieu of normality and desensitization, you'd see that tensions were high, with the beating of Rodney King and Jeffrey Dahmer's horrific crimes being unearthed in 1991, and then the O.J. Simpson trial in 1994, followed by the Oklahoma City bombing in 95. And now bouts of heinous violence were sprouting up all over the nation. The infamous Woodsboro murders, as the media had dubbed them, had lit the match underneath the cinema and violence debate primarily because they seemed to be fashioned in the style of your average splatter flick. Blood was splattered on walls, victims were disemboweled like freshly killed pigs, and then hung and propped up like macabre pieces of artwork, like something right out of Suspiria or Evil Dead. Except in these murders, there was nothing supernatural, just pure human evil. They had clearly been done by someone who had watched one too many scary movies and had done their best to emulate them, and someone who had been playing by their own set of sick, twisted rules. Nobody had ever seen anything like it. Who could have done something so heinous? Who, in the incredibly average town of Woodsboro, had been able to do something so horrific to innocent people? What had made them snap? That was the central question of the debate. Was it the movies that made them snap and turn to violence, or had they been vicious killers their whole lives, simply a walking time bomb waiting for something to set them off, something to light the burning rage that they felt inside? Maybe it was the parents who should have taken some responsibility and taken it upon themselves to restrict their child from those sorts of movies, if they had certain psychological issues. After all, there was something about horror movies that piqued a sense of intrigue and wonder from deep within the human psyche. Something very primal and very real. That's how they made so much money, after all. We all have fear. Fear is what drives some people, controls others, shapes you into the kind of person you are. Fear was something ancient humans were too keen on. Back then, fear helped you survive. That pricking on the back of your neck and clammy hands and the stabbing pit in your gut often were red flags that something bad was nearby, like a predator lurking in the bushes, ready to rip you limb from limb and devour you for dinner. In more recent times, that vivid and salient fear our ancestors felt still lingers around in the form of crippling anxiety, fervent ideologies, and various forms of prejudice and discrimination, albeit often showing up due to relatively mundane reasons like social ostracization or missing the bus or losing your job. Are we getting soft? Some think so. Political and social discussions are often rife with the proverbial pull yourself up by the bootstraps sentiment. Lots of earlier generations call the Later generations weak, implying that being vulnerable and afraid and fragile means you are somehow inferior. The little things hurt us way more, perhaps because there aren't any big scary predators trying to eat us, and so, to us, our extreme feelings of fear and dread seem unreasonable or even downright irrational. Maybe they were right. Maybe humans had nothing to be afraid of but themselves. Maybe true fear didn't come from big monsters with bugging eyes and fangs leaping out of back alleys or humanoid creatures from the deep anymore. True fear was what happened every day across the world, what humans can do to each other. There is nothing more terrifying than ourselves, and as time passes, it becomes more and more obvious. That was true fear. Not the kind of fear of experiencing your first breakup or fumbling a prestigious public speaking event, but a fear that courses through your veins, makes you weak at the knees, robs you of your ability to reason and think clearly, makes your heart beat out of your chest, and feels like someone kicking you as hard as they can deep in your guts. 17-year-old Casey Becker loved that kind of fear. It was why she loved horror movies, specifically the slasher genre. True fear wasn't about little ghost twins or aliens or zombies. True fear was real. True fear is what happens to innocent people every day. Murder, violence, death. There was something so horrifying about a guy who just all of a sudden, for no rhyme or reason, takes a knife and starts butchering innocent people. Like in Halloween. Halloween was the first horror film that Casey had watched. Her ex-boyfriend had talked her into watching them, and ever since she had been hooked. Although she wasn't cognizant of it, it was the thrill of it all that enraptured her. The eerie, emotionless white mask, the haunting music, the story of the psychopath who kills a group of innocent teenagers one by one on a cold, windy Halloween night in a small Midwestern town. It was all so iconic. Maybe part of it was the human behavior that interested her. Maybe she was just so fascinated by the horrible and cruel things people can do to each other. It's what the horror genre was all about. Casey loved watching the characters fight back and live to see another day. True fear is what actually happens out there in this cruel world. People being tortured, killed, taken from the world so violently, but then, if those things were so awful, why did Casey love watching them so much? It was almost like a bad car accident. As much as you wanted to keep your eyes on the road, you just had to veer over to the left just for a little bit to check out the damage. You couldn't help but watch. It reels your nature, your natural human curiosity right in. That's the double-edged sword of true fear. It's repulsive, but so captivating at the same time. Casey stared out the glass patio doors into the dark night and hugged her warm woolen sweater to her body tightly. She was looking for the headlights of Stephen Orth's blue SUV his parents had gotten him for his 16th birthday. 18-year-old Stephen Orth was the head quarterback of the football team, a real catch. Tall, muscular, ruggedly handsome, with dark hair, dark eyes. What else could she ask for? They'd been dating for a month, long enough that calling him over when she didn't want to be alone felt natural. She pictured his strong arms holding her in his big blue and yellow letterman's jacket with the words Woodsboro High emblazoned across the back. She checked the clock anxiously. Where the hell was he? Practice was supposed to end at 8. It was almost 10. Her parents were out on a date night, leaving the house too quiet, too big. Nights like these always got under her skin. Usually, Stephen showed up before she had time to freak herself out. Mr. and Mrs. Becker weren't particularly fond of her having boys over without them knowing, and especially late at night. But after meeting Steve, they decided it would be better for her to have some company while they were out. After all, Steve was on the football team, and they figured he could handle himself in a bad situation and protect her. But still, It was getting later than her parents would be happy with. The TV hummed behind her, its blue light reflected in the tall floor-to-ceiling windows that surrounded her. The two movies she had picked out from the video store after school were both sitting on the kitchen counter, unopened. She had picked out Halloween and Nightmare on Elm Street, two that she was sure would scare the shit out of him. Let him squirm. She glanced down the long hallway into the foyer at the front door. If he didn't hurry, her parents would be home, and all Steve would get for the night would be a stern lecture from her father and then be sent home. Casey reached for the ringing landline on the end table. It had to be Steve. "Hello?"
"Hello?"
a man's voice said. Casey frowned. It wasn't Steve. It was a very distinctive voice, one she would have remembered, but she couldn't put that voice with a face. "Yes?" Casey said.
"Who is this?"
the man asked. "Who are you trying to reach?" Casey said.
"What number is this?"
She hesitated. "What number are you trying to reach?"
"I don't know."
"Well, I think you have the wrong number," Casey said.
"Do I?"
"It happens. Take it easy," she said politely and hung up the phone. She walked into the hallway towards the kitchen and glanced around nervously. There was nothing but tall glass windows on either side of the hall. Stopping for a second, she listened to the sounds of nature from the thick woods that surrounded her house. She hated being home alone, especially at night. She didn't know why her parents had bought a house that was mostly glass. You would think it would make you feel protected, but it made her feel the opposite, like someone was always watching her. It didn't feel open, it felt exposed. Hallways with glass on either side and a pair of huge, fully glass patio doors. What were they thinking? Sure, nothing really all that bad happened in Woodsboro, but that wasn't entirely true. Last year, a girl at her school, Sydney Prescott, had lost her mother, murdered in her own home. Someone had broken in and killed her while she slept. Casey swallowed. She knew Sydney, sat 2 rows behind her in English. This wasn't some headline from another town. It had happened here. She snapped out of her morbid thoughts and glanced out the patio doors that looked out into the backyard. An eerie mist hung over the surface of the Olympic-sized swimming pool. 2 halogen floodlights mounted on poles illuminated the back of the yard next to a rickety wooden shed. The woods that surrounded her home on either side were dark, and it was a cloudy, blustery night. A full moon hung ominously in the sky. Bad night to be home alone, she thought. And now she was thinking about things like that. Thinking about that psycho killer in the white mask in that horror movie. The one about the babysitter home alone on a dark night. Images of the cold, steely blade of a knife plunging into her, and hands around her neck flashed into her mind. God, she thought, don't do this to yourself. But it was too late. Her thoughts were already racing. She was all alone out in the woods, just like in Friday the 13th. In Friday the 13th, a group of kids go out into the woods for a weekend at an abandoned summer camp, and one by one someone kills them, hunts them down. Casey shuddered, feeling a cold chill up her arm from seeing the ghastly images in her head. Don't scare yourself to death, she thought to herself. It was only 9 o'clock. I'm going to start seeing things, she thought. It was those goddamn horror movies that did this to her, but she just couldn't help herself. She should have never gone to the video store, and she should have refrained from the scary movies. But Steve had been dying to see them, and why not? They were classics, and it would keep Steve and his hands occupied. Maybe she was just jumpy from being alone in the big house at night. Yeah, that had to be it. After all, the movies never fazed her before. They were just movies. She had always reminded herself. It was all just a movie and none of it was real, right? Casey looked back towards the end table. Who could it be this time? Sighing tiredly, Casey sauntered back towards the receiver sitting on the table and picked it up. "Hello?" she said, trying not to sound as annoyed as she truly was.
I'm sorry, I guess I dialed the wrong number.
It was the same voice from before. "So, why'd you dial it again?" Casey asked.
To apologize.
Casey's smile thinned. "You're forgiven. Bye now."
Wait, don't hang up.
The voice cut her off hastily. Casey brought the phone back up to her ear, growing impatient. "What?"
I want to talk to you for a second.
the man said. Casey scoffed. "They've got like 900 numbers for that? See ya." Casey shot back and hung up the phone. What a weirdo, Casey thought to herself. Who calls random numbers just to talk to strangers? She glanced once more at the windows, still no headlights, then turned toward the kitchen. If Steve wasn't coming anytime soon, she might as well start the popcorn. The centerpiece of the large, well-furnished kitchen was an island with wooden countertops, surrounded by a few matching bar stools. A small hallway led to a side door, also made of glass. Casey crossed the kitchen, pulled a pan of Jiffy Pop from the freezer and set it on the stove. The burner flared blue. She shook the pan, listening to the kernels rattle. Casey groaned. "You gotta be kidding." Leaving the popcorn crackling, she grabbed the cordless off the counter. "Hello?"
Why don't you want to talk to me?
Same voice. "Who is this?" Casey asked firmly, returning to the stove.
Tell me your name, I'll tell you mine.
Casey made a wry face. I don't think so." She shook the pan.
What's that noise?
The man asked. Casey smirked. "Maybe I could play along for a little while." "Popcorn?"
You making popcorn?
the man asked. "Uh-huh."
I only eat popcorn if it's open.
"Well, I'm getting ready to watch a video," Casey said. Casey turned away from the stove and sat at the kitchen island. A wooden butcher block full of knives sat in front of her.
Really? What?
"Oh, just some scary movie," Casey said.
You like scary movies?
Uh-huh.
What's your favorite scary movie?
"What is this, 20 questions?" Casey wondered. She stifled a giggle. She was enjoying this a little too much. I don't know," Casey responded, pretending to be deep in thought.
You have to have a favorite.
Casey thought for a moment. Her hand reached for one of the butcher knives in the butcher block. She pulled out the knife, absent-mindedly toying with it, eyeing its razor-sharp blade. Her gaze then fell on the unopened videotapes still lying on the counter where she had left them. "Halloween," she answered. "You know, the one with the guy in the white mask who walks around and stalks babysitters?" She slid the knife back into the block.
Yeah.
The voice replied. "What's yours?"
Guess.
She said, playing along. She glanced again at the unopened videotapes on the counter and smiled. "Nightmare on Elm Street?" Casey guessed. She picked up the videotapes and started walking back down the glass-lined hallway towards the living room.
Is that the one where the guy had knives for fingers?
Yeah.
"Freddy Krueger," Casey said proudly.
Freddy, that's right.
The man said.
I like that movie. It was scary.
"Well, the first one was. The rest sucked." There was a short pause as Casey walked towards the living room.
So, you got a boyfriend?
The man asked. Casey stopped in her tracks. She grinned deviously. "No, I don't," she lied. Since Steve had decided to take his sweet-ass time, why couldn't she have a little fun as well? "Why? Do you want to ask me out on a date?" Casey toyed with him, twirling her short blonde hair around her finger.
Maybe.
Casey walked into the living room, heading for the television.
You never told me your name.
The man said. "Why do you want to know my name?" Casey asked, placing the tapes on top of the television set.
I want to know who I'm looking at.
A chill slid up Casey's spine. She stood there for a moment, stunned. "What did you say?" Casey stammered, pretending like she hadn't heard him correctly, but she had heard exactly what he had said.
I want to know who I'm talking to.
The voice said nonchalantly. That's not what you said, she shot back. Casey moved fast straight for the patio doors, locking them, then flicking on the floodlights. The backyard flooded with white light. The pool, the shed, the fence at the edge of the woods.
What do you think I said?
The voice asked. Look, I have to go, Casey said. The playfulness was gone now.
What? Wait, I thought we were going to go out.
The man protested, coaxing Casey back into the conversation. Her stomach tightened. She should have known not to answer. She didn't care how friendly and alluring his voice sounded. This had gone too far. No, I don't think so.
Don't hang up on me.
The voice demanded, but Casey was fast. She heard the satisfying click of the line being cut off, and she glanced towards the patio doors once more, making sure there was nobody outside. Casey inched towards the kitchen, hardly able to take her eyes off of the patio doors. Shit! What if it was him? But what if it was Steve or her parents? Casey looked straight ahead towards the kitchen, hearing the popcorn crackling loudly on the stove. Casey took a deep breath and put the phone to her ear.
I told you not to hang up on me.
It was him again, but something was different. The tone in his voice had completely changed. There was something threatening about it. His voice had been teetering on the line between eerie and conversational, and now it had tipped over and gone completely sinister. What do you want? Casey asked, her voice cracking. Tears began to fill her eyes.
Talk.
The man replied, his voice raising in pitch. Well, dial someone else, okay? Casey said and hung up the phone. Wiping away her tears, Casey walked down the hallway into the kitchen, moving towards the stove. God, he really got to you, she thought. It was probably just some lonely weirdo who dialed her number out of the phone book. It was one of those crank calls. It had to be. The tin foil that kept the popcorn inside the pan had started to bulge, and the popcorn was popping loudly. As she reached for the pan handle, and Casey felt her face growing hot with anger. She had had enough. Her hand gripped the phone so tightly her knuckles turned white. She brought the phone up to her face and answered, not even giving the creep enough time to speak. Listen, asshole! She yelled into the phone through clenched teeth. Casey's face drained of color as she listened to the man's voice suddenly take on a much angrier tone than before.
No, you listen, you little bitch. You hang up on me again, I'll gut you like a fish, understand?
Casey felt her stomach knotting until it felt like she was being struck in the gut by a sledgehammer, as she shrunk back into the corner, trembling at the pure evil in his voice. She heard him laugh on the other line, a sinister snickering. Is this some kind of joke? Casey's voice trembled.
Yeah, more of a game, really. Can you handle that?
The voice rasped. The caller had completely morphed into a horrifying persona. There was a pause, and as Casey pressed the phone to her ear, listening to what he was going to say next, her heart hammering, he spoke.
Blondie, can you see me?
The phone fell from her hand onto the floor. She sunk to her knees, her legs barely able to support her, and she saw her reflection in the stove. She saw her blonde hair. She repeated the words in her mind until it finally hit her. Blondie, Blondie. He could see her. This guy was outside, watching her through the windows. Casey's jaw dropped as the horrifying truth hit her like a bolt of lightning, and she sprang to her feet. Incited by pure adrenaline, Casey snatched up the phone, ran down the hallway, forgetting all about the popcorn, and scrambled to the front door. Fastening the lock and deadbolt, she peered through the tiny windows on either side of the door, scanning the front yard. The yard was empty. This wasn't happening. This couldn't be happening. Casey's mind frantically spun around in circles, trying to rationalize what was happening. Casey, get a grip, she told herself. Maybe if you put your foot down and stood up to this fucker, he would leave you alone. Maybe you could shake him up a bit. It could be some jerk from school. After all, that explained how he knew that she had blonde hair. Listen, I am 2 seconds away from calling the police, Casey threatened, trying to sound as intimidating as possible.
They'd never make it in time. We're out in the middle of nowhere,
the man said chillingly. Casey began to cry, tears finding their way down her cheeks. He was right. It would take the police at least 15 minutes to get out here. She was alone. What was he planning to do to her? Where was Steve? What do you want? Casey begged through a torrent of tears. A beat. The only sound was her own panicked breathing.
To see what your insides look like.
A wave of nausea suddenly overcame her and she hung up, letting the phone fall from her hand. She doubled over, barely able to stand, tears stinging her eyes. A shrill noise made Casey scream and leap out of her skin. She whirled around, craning her neck to see. There was nobody outside. Who's there? Who's there? Silence. Now she knew someone was out there. Fuck it. It was time for the cops. She scrambled for the phone on the floor, but just as she picked it up, it rang again in her hand. She screamed at the top of her lungs, petrified beyond reality. The man was quick to talk when she reluctantly answered it.
You should never say who's there. Don't you watch scary movies? It's a death wish. You might as well just come out here to investigate a strange noise or something.
The voice sneered. Casey knew she had to stop engaging or scare the hell out of this creep. In a split second, she chose the latter and clenched her teeth until her jaws were sore. Listen, you've had your fun. Now you better leave me alone because my boyfriend will be here any second, Casey said, wiping away tears.
I thought you didn't have a boyfriend.
I lied. I do have a boyfriend, and he is on his way, and he's going to be pissed when he finds out you're here, Casey squeaked, maintaining her balance against the door frame.
Sure, I'm getting scared. I'm shaking in my boots.
The caller mocked. Casey's muscles tensed. He's big and he plays football and he's gonna kick the shit out of you. She screamed as loud as she could until her voice felt hoarse, now sobbing hysterically. There was no response from the other line, just silence. At first, she thought it worked, that she had scared him off. She took a deep breath, listening to the maddening silence on the other line, waiting for him to say something, anything.
His name wouldn't be Steve, would it?
The voice rasped knowingly. His voice was lower now, more serious than ever. Casey's jaw fell. How do you know his name? Casey stammered in disbelief.
Turn on the patio lights.
Her heart skipped a beat. Her knees buckled again and she collapsed. Casey snapped back to reality and staggered to her feet. She managed to stumble down the hallway into the living room, moving towards the patio doors. Casey obeyed, reaching for the light switch, her hand quivering. As she switched it on, the floodlights illuminated the patio. Casey looked through the glass and froze at what she saw. A choked scream erupted from the bottom of her soul. Steve was tied to a lawn chair in the middle of the patio, barely alive. Rope was tied around his hands and feet, duct tape across his mouth. He was bloodied and bruised, and his hair was disheveled and caked with blood. Steve's eyes lit up as he saw Casey, and he began to squirm in the chair, the tape muffling his pitiful cries. Casey screamed again, not truly believing what she was seeing. Oh, God! She instinctively reached for the patio doors and flung them open.
I wouldn't do that if I were you.
The voice snarled. Casey resisted the urge to run out into the yard, and she slammed the door shut, pressing herself against the glass helplessly. She sunk to her knees, now reduced to a blubbering, incomprehensible heap on the floor. Please, please don't hurt him, Casey pleaded.
Yes, that all depends on you.
The man said. Casey sat up, listening intently, wiping tears from her eyes. What do you mean?
I want to play a game.
Casey began to cry again, shaking her head in disbelief. No, please just leave us alone.
Then he dies right now.
No, no, Casey shrieked, leaping to her feet and shaking her head. She began to bang furiously on the door, watching Steve squirm helplessly, the thin glass, her only barrier between her and her lover in peril. Just let him go, please, she cried.
Which is it? Which is it?
The voice asked. It was a terrifying decision Casey had to make. Casey relaxed, trying to make sense of the situation, taking deep breaths. Just play his stupid game. She looked out the glass doors at Steve wriggling in the chair, tugging at the ropes that were tying him down. Tears stained his face. She could run outside and save him, she thought. Just grab a baseball bat and go out there and nail this bastard. No, too risky. There might be more than one. Finally, she took a deep breath and spoke into the phone. What kind of game? She asked.
Turn off the light. You'll see what kind of game.
The man rasped. Casey let out a heaving sob, tasting the saltiness of her tears on her lips. She shook her head in refusal. Her eyes scanned the backyard madly, searching for him in vain. He could be anywhere out there in the darkness.
Just do it.
She inched her way towards the light switch reluctantly, as Steve's gaze followed her. He began to thrash violently in the chair, shaking his head and screaming her name, but through the duct tape, he was barely audible. Casey couldn't watch herself. She closed her eyes tightly, feeling the tears rushing to the surface underneath her eyelids. She braced herself and slowly turned out the lights, bathing the patio in darkness. Casey collapsed to her knees helplessly, trying to block out the sound of Steve's panicked, muffled cries. She crawled over behind the television set, crouching down between the television and the wall. Her knee bumped the cord to the lamp on top of the end table, and the cord fell out of the socket. The room slammed into pitch-black darkness. There was no sound but the man's menacing voice on the other line.
Here's how we play,
he began. Casey listened intently, trying to hear him over her own heavy breathing and the rapid pounding of her heart.
I ask a question. If you get it right, Steve lives.
Casey was still in disbelief. No, please don't do this, she pleaded.
Come on, it'll be fun.
Please.
It's an easy category. Movie trivia.
Now his voice was soothing and calming, coaxing Casey into playing his sick, twisted game. No, please. The man had no remorse, hearing Casey's pitiful sobs. He went on.
Or even give you a warm-up question. Name the killer in Halloween.
Casey could barely speak, much less think. She shook her head, whimpering softly, hoping, praying.
Come on, it's your favorite scary movie, remember? He had a white mask, he stalked the babysitters.
The voice purred, calming her. She couldn't think straight. Her mind was a blur. She hugged her knees to her chest, curling up into a fetal position. No. Please. I can't do this, she sobbed.
Oh,
Come on, yes you
No.
do. What's his name? Steve's counting on you.
The image of Steve's battered body flashed into her mind. She sat up onto her knees, closed her eyes, blinking away tears. She immediately remembered the white mask. What was his fucking name? And then, almost by God, she knew the answer. Michael! It was Michael Myers, Casey responded.
Yes! Very good.
The man exclaimed. He sounded like some sort of twisted game show host.
Now for the real question.
No! Casey shrieked.
You're doing so well. We can't stop now.
Casey's eyes lit up and she sat up with determination. Okay, just please promise you'll leave us alone, she whimpered.
Then answer the question. Same category.
Casey let out a sigh of relief and pressed the phone tightly to her ear, listening intently. This was her one chance. She couldn't fuck it up. After a few moments of unbearable silence, she finally heard the man's voice speak up.
Name the killer in Friday the 13th.
Casey's lips pursed into a mad smile. She fucking knew this. Jason! Jason! It was Jason! She shrieked madly, leaping to her feet.
I'm sorry. That's the wrong answer.
Casey's heart sank. It couldn't be. The killer was Jason fucking Voorhees. She knew it was. No, it's not. No, it's not. It was Jason, Casey protested.
Afraid not? No way.
The voice hissed. Listen, it was Jason. I saw that movie 20 goddamn times, Casey barked, her hands clenched into tight fists around the tear-stained sleeves of her sweater.
Then you should know Jason's mother, Mrs. Voorhees, was the original killer. Jason didn't show up until the sequel. I'm afraid that was a wrong answer.
The man explained with an evil laugh. Stupefied, Casey felt her stomach sinking even more. Her body became racked with horror, and her knees almost buckled beneath her. He was right. The bastard was fucking right. You tricked me.
Lucky for you, there's a bonus round. But poor Steve, I'm afraid he's out.
Casey was suddenly numb from head to toe. She couldn't move or scream. She was dumbfounded. All of a sudden, through the glass, out of the corner of her eye, she saw the shadowy figure leap from the bushes, and a black gloved hand clamped tightly over Steve's mouth and pulled his head back. She saw the flash of silver, and her eyes grew wide as she heard the sound of ripping fabric. Flesh tore. Steve cried out through the tape. Casey leapt to her feet instinctively, scrambling towards the patio doors and flicking on the light. She had no time to scream or react, no time to open the door and save him. It was too late. His collared shirt had been ripped open at the seams, and his stomach had been sliced wide open. Steve was beyond dead. His head was slumped back lifelessly in the chair. A pool of blood was beginning to form beneath him. His guts were spilling out of the gaping wound and onto his lap. A steaming pile of entrails had begun to form at his feet. The killer had disappeared back into the shadows. Casey didn't have the strength to scream or run. She collapsed again, utterly horrified, her mouth agape in terror. She felt another overpowering wave of nausea come over her, and she doubled over, gagging at the sight, trying to maintain her composure. "Steve!" she shrieked, pounding her fist on the hardwood floor. She could hear the killer's evil, maniacal laughter on the phone, enjoying every minute of this. Casey jumped to her feet and turned off the light. Immersing herself in darkness once again, she scrambled backwards into her hiding spot, ducking down behind the television set.
Hey, we're not finished yet.
She heard the killer growl. Casey reached down with a trembling hand, groping for the phone in the darkness. She found it and put it to her ear, trembling, her voice almost gone from screaming. "Please, please leave me alone," she begged. Maybe it would all be a joke, she thought. Maybe Steve wasn't dead. Maybe it was all just an elaborate joke. Maybe it was all a prank by the kids at school, and they would all jump out from behind a wall and yell, "Gotcha!" Or maybe this was too real, and it was all wishful thinking.
Answer the question and I will.
The killer demanded. Casey sobbed into the tear-stained sleeve of her sweater. She didn't have the strength to protest. She curled up back into a fetal position, softly crying, listening to his voice. She would do anything at this point, anything to get him to stop.
What door am I at?
The man asked.
There are two main doors to your house, a front door and the patio doors. If you answer correctly, you live. Very simple.
Casey looked towards the front door and then towards the patio doors. She studied them both, trying to deliberate between the two. "Fuck this," she finally said to herself. "I'm done." She wasn't playing his games anymore. She grabbed a letter opener off the desk and clutched it tightly in her hands. Casey knew that giving in was no longer an option. Not anymore. "I can't do this. I won't," she said softly through tears. Everything went deathly quiet. Casey listened in horror, still holding a death grip on the phone. She waited for something to happen, anything. Then his voice whispered something.
Your call.
Just as things grew maddeningly silent, the patio doors imploded inwards. as one of the patio chairs came flying through the glass with incredible force. Bits of wood and shards of glass sprayed across the room in one loud and calamitous act of violence and rage. Casey barely let out any kind of impulsive scream. She took off through the house in one instinctual bound, dropping the letter opener in sheer panic. She ran through the darkened house, barreling down the hallway into the kitchen, oblivious to the popcorn engulfed in flames on the stove, the tinfoil expanding far beyond its normal capacity. She scanned the kitchen for a better weapon, anything she could find to defend herself. She ran towards the butcher block on the kitchen island and grabbed the handle of the longest, sharpest knife and pulled it out of the block. Casey then whirled around to face the door to the hallway, holding the knife out in front of her in a defensive pose. She could barely see anything. Thick smoke filled the room, enveloping her. She made her way through the kitchen, the knife in one hand and the phone in the other, listening. She could hear someone in the living room, the sound of feet crunching over broken glass. Oh, God, she thought. He was in the house. She had to get out. Get out, her mind screamed. She slowly inched her way towards her only escape, the side door. As she passed by the hallway, she peered down towards the living room just as a fleeting shadow darted past the hallway towards the stairs. She held her breath in her throat, thinking now was her chance to get out without him hearing her. She stopped, looked at the hallway, and then looked back at the glass door at the side of the house. Her only escape. No time to lose. Casey clutched the knife tightly, gently pushed the side door open, and slipped outside, closing it as quietly as she could. She glanced around at her surroundings. All she saw in front of her was wooden fencing. Beyond that, the thick woods that surrounded her home. Could she run for it? Where would she go? It would take miles to reach the nearest neighbor, and even farther into town. There could be more of them, out in the woods waiting for her. There was nowhere to run. Her yard was surrounded on two sides by a fence. She didn't have a car. She was like a caged animal awaiting its slaughter. She looked down at the phone in her hand. Would it do her any good to call the police? It would take them at least 15 minutes to drive all the way out to her house. Could she elude this psychopath for 15 minutes? She didn't want to find out. Her only option was to get to the road and just run, and she would eventually find her parents on their way back home. And to get to the road, she had to make her way down the patio, past Steve, past the glass doors, and get to the side of the house. Fuck, she thought desperately. She took a deep breath and began inching her way down the side of the house. She clambered up onto the back porch and made her way towards the patio, ducking down to avoid being seen by the killer. There were 3 curtainless windows ahead. The lights in the house suddenly clicked on. He was looking for her. She crouched down underneath the first window and stuck her head barely above the sill, peering into the house. Where the hell was he? And then she caught a quick glance of someone in black, a shadowy phantom moving like a silent hunter stalking their prey through the living room, and she ducked back down in a split second, her heart pounding loudly, one hand with a white-knuckle grip on the phone and the other on the butcher knife. Casey crawled down the side of the house, poking her head up to look through the next window. The killer was in the hallway now, moving towards the kitchen. His black cloak glided effortlessly from room to room like a ghost, illuminated by the glow of the flames, searching. She could hear his heavy breathing through the phone still in her hand. Casey ducked back down as she saw him make his way into the kitchen. If she could buy herself some more time and run for the road, surely her parents were on their way home by now. All she would have to do is run down the road and flag them down. If she could just get around to the front yard without him seeing her. She deliberated for a second, and then realized she had 2 choices. Make as little noise as possible, and crawl underneath the windows, or just book it. Casey curled her fingers tightly around the knife handle, her chest heaving, her heart racing, trying to stay as low as possible. She didn't have much time. She had to act fast. She made the choice and crawled as fast and as quietly as she could on her hands and knees towards the patio doors and stopped at the 3rd window, looking into the living room. She had to make sure he was still in the kitchen, looking for her. Casey slowly rose to her feet, looking into the window. The window was completely blacked out. She stood up and realized what it was. It was black fabric. It was a cloak. A black cloak. The killer was staring right back at her through the windows. His face was covered by a ghostly white mask. The dark eye holes stared into Casey's soul. The killer suddenly sprang forward, smashing through the window, grabbing Casey by her wrist in a talon-like grip, pulling her towards him. She screamed hysterically as the killer lunged at her again in a wild paroxysm, his head smashing through the remainder of the glass in the window and his strong hands grabbing her by the throat. The knife fell from her hands as she writhed in the ghost grasp. All Casey had was the cordless phone still clutched in her free hand. She lashed out, clobbering him in his mask with the phone, and he growled in anger, staggering back into the smoke-filled interior of the house. Casey forgot all about the knife still laying on the concrete. There was only one thing she could think of, and that was getting away, out to the road and to her parents. She began to run. Casey stumbled across the patio, cringing at the sight of her boyfriend's corpse, still tied to the chair. His organs spilled onto his lap. She sailed around the corner of the house, sprinting across the yard. Her eyes lit up as she saw her parents' Chevy Camaro coming down the country road. Casey cried out joyously, overcome with relief, but it didn't last long. As Casey passed by one of the several large, fully glass windows in the living room, the masked killer came smashing through from the inside, tackling her to the ground. Casey screamed and fell onto the grass, the killer coming down on top of her. She kicked, knocking the killer backwards, and she scrambled to her feet. Casey ran towards the front of the house, watching as her parents' car pulled into the driveway. She extended her hand, reaching for them, trying to call out, but right as she reached the corner of the house, a gloved hand clamped down on her mouth and yanked her backwards with immense force, and out of sight. She had time to glance over her shoulder and see the killer's demented eyes glaring down at her through the eye holes in the ghost mask. There was a flash of silver, and Casey didn't even feel it at first. The knife plunged into the side of her chest. Incredulous, Casey looked down at the wound as her chest began to blossom bright red. She fell onto the grass on her back, coughing, choking on her own blood bubbling up in her throat, the pain overwhelming her. She clutched her hand to the wound, feeling warm blood flowing between her fingers. The masked figure came down on top of her, straddling her midsection and pinning her down, the knife poised to stab her again. Casey mustered up every ounce of strength she had left and knocked the knife out of his hand with her fist. She swung her other fist at him, scratching and clawing at his mask, hitting at him with the phone in all but a futile effort. He was too strong. His hands grabbed her by the throat and squeezed tightly. Casey gagged for air, clawing at the gloved hands that were choking the life out of her and crushing her larynx. Her parents climbed out of the Camaro just a few yards away, oblivious to the horror. Casey heard the car door slamming, and it sent a jolt of energy through her. She managed to wriggle one of her legs free from underneath him, and just as her eyes were beginning to roll into the back of her head from the lack of oxygen, she lifted up her knee, slamming it into her attacker's groin. The killer let out a pained groan and staggered over to the side, growling in anger and clutching himself. Casey was free, and she didn't have much time. Wincing at the pain that paralyzed the entire left side of her body, she gave a grunt as she flipped herself over onto her belly and started to pull herself up into a crawling position. She managed to lift her head up, and she watched as her parents walked from the car towards the house, chatting idly. Their chatter blurred in and out of hearing, in between Casey's own ragged breathing and the throbbing in her head and chest from being strangled. She could hear them talking about the fish at dinner and about the tulips in the small flower bed in the garden. She weakly crawled across the grass towards them, trying to lift herself up enough to walk, but the pain was too much to bear. She could barely breathe. The knife had punctured her lung and blood was gushing from the gash just under her collarbone. She felt the warmth of the liquid pouring between her fingers. Her voice barely rose to a strained whisper. She put a hand up to her throat, trying to make sound come out, but all that came out was a dry, rasping sound. Her trachea was virtually crushed. Just as she managed to pull herself up onto the front porch, feeling the wood digging into the palms of her hands, she watched in disbelief as her parents disappeared inside the house, the front door shut tightly behind them. She didn't see the killer rising up behind her. She was suddenly slammed to the ground by the killer's foot, pressing down hard on her back. She hit hard against the wooden porch, her breath escaping her. She couldn't get up or fight. She had gone limp. The masked killer flipped Casey's barely alive body over on her back as she looked up at him helplessly. All she could do was watch. She could feel the blood soaking her, draining from her, along with her life. It was all over now. She gazed up at him, pleading with her eyes, unable to do anything but reach her trembling hand up with the little bit of strength she had left and yank on the blood-spattered rubber ghost mask that covered his face. As she saw who was under the mask, she began to sob, and her vision slowly began to blur in various shades of red and white. Her life was slowly slipping away, and her last vision was the look of utter loathing and hatred of that face, the face that she knew. She couldn't believe it. "Why?" Casey managed to say, her eyes filling with more tears. She could only lie there and watch. The killer lifted the knife into the air and brought it down. Mr. and Mrs. Becker stepped through the front door and froze. "What the hell?" Mr. Becker muttered under his breath. Both of their faces drained of color as they saw the shattered patio doors and the glass littering the floor. The patio chair lay overturned in the middle of the living room. "Oh, God!" she exclaimed. "Casey?" Mr. Becker called into the smoke-filled house. There was no answer, just an oppressive silence that hung in the air like dead weight. "I'll look upstairs," Mr. Becker said, and dashed up the staircase, calling his daughter's name frantically. Mrs. Becker was galvanized into action when she sniffed the air, noticing the telltale odor of smoke and the shrill beeping of the alarm. She sprinted into the kitchen, coughing and fighting her way through the thick smoke. The pan of Jiffy Pop that her daughter had been making was ablaze. Tall orange flames lapped at the ceiling above the stove. She snatched a dish towel off the counter, threw it over the burning popcorn, picked up the pan by the wooden handle, and threw it into the sink. She turned on the tap, and the flames were slowly extinguished by the running water. "Casey! Casey!" Mrs. Becker screamed hysterically. She ran back down the hallway into the foyer, screaming for her daughter, colliding with her husband as he came barreling down the staircase. "Oh, God, she's not upstairs!" Mr. Becker cried. "Where is she? Casey!" Mrs. Becker screamed again, the panic of the situation starting to overtake her. "Call the police," her husband told her, and they both ran for the phone on the end table by the door. Mrs. Becker picked up the phone and began to dial 911. When she stopped short, she heard something strange, garbled sounds coming from the other line. Someone was using another phone in the house. Someone was on the line. Mrs. Becker slowly put the phone to her ear, praying and hoping to hear the soft, sweet voice of her daughter. "Casey, baby?" she said into the phone. Her husband listened, horrified out of his mind, his eyes searching the house madly for Casey. There was a dragging sound and a horrible slicing sound on the other line, and a teenage girl's pained cries. "Casey! Casey, is that you, Casey?" Mrs. Becker screamed into the phone. Casey's whimpering came over the line, and Mrs. Becker's heart sank, instantly recognizing her daughter's painful voice. Suddenly, a man's unintelligible voice came over the line. It was rough and harsh. There was a loud thud and another slicing sound, and then click. The line went dead. Mrs. Becker's knees almost gave out beneath her as she heard the drone of the dial tone fill the room. She let the phone fall from her trembling hand and stared into her husband's eyes. Someone had her daughter. God, they had her, she thought. They both exchanged knowing glances. Her husband's grimace tightened, and he tried to regain his composure. But on the inside, he was scared shitless just as much as her, and he knew something was horribly wrong. "No, not my daughter, not my daughter," Mrs. Becker whimpered, shaking her head. "Listen to me. Drive down to the Mackenzie's house and call the police, okay?" Mr. Becker said, guiding his wife towards the door. She was barely able to stand up. Mrs. Becker opened the door and stumbled weakly outside onto the porch with her husband, holding his hand tightly, making their way towards the car. And then they both stopped dead in their tracks at what they saw. Their gaze was directed towards the huge oak tree in the front yard. Something was hanging from one of the branches. Mrs. Becker let out a gut-wrenching scream at the sight and fell to her knees. Casey was strung up like a slab of meat in a slaughterhouse, a rope tied tightly around her neck. Her face was chalky white, her eyes had sunk back into her skull, and her stomach had been ripped open. A pile of steaming organs lay underneath her. The cordless phone was still grasped tightly in her right hand. Casey's father stared on in horror. Mrs. Becker screamed again as the rope suspending her daughter in midair suddenly snapped, coinciding with the thunder rumbling softly in the sky, the oncoming storm mingling with the sound of a mother's anguished cries and lightning flashing. The Woodsboro murders had begun. Okay, Slashaholics, this has been Chapter 1 of Scream, the novelization by Landon Turner. I'm sure a few of you were wondering when this was finally going to drop. I've teased it a couple times in the past couple weeks. I've actually been setting on this one for a while. There was a few other things I wanted to knock out first. And I do intend on finishing Freddy vs. Ash and Destination Zero and Nightmares. But I have begun Scream. I'll be putting out more chapters soon. I did enjoy this chapter. It was pretty much, paint by numbers with the movie, but Landon does a good job of putting you into the character's head, even the killer's psyche a bit, and really amplifying the tension and suspense. So I'm curious to see what he does with the rest of the book, if he takes any creative liberties or not. Either way, seems like a great time to finally do the Scream novelization, with Scream 7 dropping very, very soon. And, I hope you all enjoyed this chapter. If you haven't done so already, please subscribe, click the like button, drop a comment, let me and Landon know what you thought of tonight's chapter, and I'll be back very soon with more. If you want to go the extra mile and help the channel, spread the word. You can also become a Patreon member, a channel member. There's an Amazon gift list. There's a Cameo page. We have a merch store. You can get my 3 books that I've written so far on Amazon. You can also do one-time tips through Super Chat tips in the comment section below, or through PayPal or Cash App. All kinds of ways to support the channel, whichever one suits you best. You can find the information in the pinned comment and description below. Until next time, this has been your friendly neighborhood 80s slasher librarian saying, thanks for listening, be excellent to each other, and I'll be right back.